Hey, I'm Marty, and we're at my buddy Dan Benoit's shop. We're going to talk about his Comet CNC mill here that he retrofitted with a Centroid control. So let's get started.
Hey, good morning, Marty. It's Dan here, and this is my little shop that I have in my two-car garage, and we're going to give you a little story about my experience with the Ajax CNC controller, and a little bit of history on this old Comet mill here that I love dearly. It's been a fantastic machine, and we're going to tell you how I acquired it and what it does for me.
Yeah, how did you get the machine, Dan? How'd you find it?
Well, a few years ago, I've always been interested in machining, number one, ever since I'm knee-high to a grasshopper. And I acquired a Bridgeport mill and a horizontal mill from a friend of mine a few years ago. Had it all in my shop. It was a great piece of equipment, but I was always intrigued with CNC. And I tell you, to be honest with you, Marty, I didn't know the difference between a G code and an M code. But I knew that it was something that I wanted to do because I've always been into computers, and I thought it was, I didn't care whether I'd machine one part or 100, it's something that I wanted to do. And so my intention was to just convert the Bridgeport, put some ball screws in and put some servo motors and, you know, the usual conversion, but that's an expensive route to go, and it's a lot of work to do that. So fortunately, or unfortunately, depending how you look at it, I'm a scrap yard junkie, and I had frequented a scrap yard here in town many times, and on this one day that I did a drive-through, I spotted this old milling machine in the corner of the yard. What happened is I knew the fellows there because I've been going there years and years, and so I asked them if the machine was for sale. And they said, absolutely, everything in the yard's for sale. And I looked at the iron, and the iron looked to be in very good shape. The other thing that I liked about this machine was that it also had manual wheels on it. So if worse come to worse, I knew that it wasn't going to be a dead loss for me, that if I didn't convert it, at least I could run it manually. And it had all the ball screws and everything because it was built as a CNC machine. So I was more than enthused about getting the machine. In fact, I was sick about it because I left that yard. I debated for an hour. I thought, you know, should I or shouldn't I? Because I had this beautiful Bridgeport. And I thought, you know what? I phoned the guy up. I said, how much you want for the machine? He quoted me $750.
Wow!
And I thought, man, I just can't not go for it.
That's a phenomenal price for even a machine in scrap.
It really was. And so then I was just sick, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to try it. And I put my Bridgeport on Craigslist. It was sold in a half an hour. So then I was screwed.
I remember that.
I had to make a decision, and so I sold the machine, and I called the mover in. I said, look, can you go pick up this machine for me? And so he went over there, and this machine weighs probably close to 4,000 pounds. I got the machine home. It didn't look anything like this.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. It looks really nice right now.
Exactly. So it didn't look anything like this. Of course, it was filthy dirty. My wife and I spent a couple of days cleaning it up. And it had this huge Fanuc M10 control system, which in its day was a beautiful control system and still runs a lot of machines today. But the problem was that the machine was in the scrapyard for a reason, and I had no idea how to, number one, I didn't know anything about CNC, let alone what the control was supposed to do. So I actually, it had a great big control panel here. Those of you familiar with them, with the M10 know what it looks like. I was able to, over time, I was able to get the control up and running. Unfortunately, someone had taken the battery out of the system, and so the parameters were all gone. And so that was my dilemma. All of a sudden I have a machine that I think might run, but I had no parameters and no information to get it going. I even put an ad in Craigslist, and I found a gentleman who was familiar with the machine. He was kind enough to come over, but he really wasn't any smarter than I was at the end, and so we sort of parted ways. And I decided at that time, I said, you know what, I've had it with this controller. I'm going to go with the modern unit. From 1986, I wanted something that was a lot more modern. So that's where I embarked on looking for something that would control the machine. So in doing my research, I discovered Ajax CNC. And I called in and spoke with Scott Pratt. Actually, was the fellow that sold me the controller that's in here now. He was more than accommodating, and so I bought the controller and I began to strip everything out of here, Marty, and I mean strip. So I cleaned the whole thing out. I probably took 400 pounds worth of stuff out of here with transformers, controllers, motherboard.
Yeah, you're telling me the servo amplifiers weighed about 15, 17 pounds a piece.
Yeah, the servo amplifiers alone are like bread boxes, and they're in demand, and I've actually sold them, which leads me to the other part of the story. Was I listed the motherboard off the M10 on eBay, and I was able to sell that motherboard for $1,000. So all of a sudden I got 250 bucks already to the good to put towards my controller. And I sold a number of parts, and I probably more than covered the cost of my controller from selling the old parts on eBay. So the other thing I want to mention is that anyone who embarks on a project like this, I've heard a lot of talk about the fear of three-phase power. And I'm a journeyman power lineman, so I know about three-phase power. And I myself started out with a phase converter, and I realized after a while that wasn't necessary. Now with the inverters that are available, they'll even run at 110 volts and convert to three-phase, and that makes everything so much easier. So basically, once that fear was gone, the only thing on here that's three-phase is the spindle motor. And so I bought a Hitachi WJ200 to run the spindle motor. Runs off of 220 volts, single phase, and it runs that just beautifully, and it's got infinite control, so it really works nice.
What other parts did you keep of the original machine, Dan?
Well, after talking with Scott, and I sent him some specifications on the servo motors and the encoders, and he was able to verify that the all-in-one DC board would work with this equipment. And so basically, the only thing that I retained from the machine was the servo motors, the spindle motor, and that was about it, the encoders. And the rest of it was all wiring in the control box to basically get the feeds up into that controller and run it.
So you were able to keep the original encoders. You didn't have to. They were 2,000 line encoders.
Exactly. So
that saved you just a little bit of money as well.
Yeah, that was great, because once you start buying these servo motors and stuff, they're very expensive. And luckily, this machine has been done for a few years now, and I've had absolutely no trouble with the motors or the encoders. Everything worked out really well. It's an accurate machine, and so yeah, it worked out really good, Marty.
So those are considered the Fanuc yellow top DC brush servo motors.
Exactly.
So you were able to reuse those. That's great. So you
everything.
kept the original lube pump.
Yep.
And then you built your own mist coolant system.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So the control panel now controls of course, the lube pump is controlled when the machine comes on. The lube pump comes on. There is an alarm on there. It'll shut the machine down if the lube runs out. And I can control my lube system either manually or through the M codes in the G code
in the control
as well. So yeah, everything works really well.
Cool. Did you reuse the servo motor power supply, or did you get one to feed the servo motors and the servo amplifiers? No,
I actually bought a new power supply, and it's just a toroidal transformer. I can't even remember where I bought it, but it's a 120 volt, and also provides 12 volts for some of my controls as well.
Okay, we'll get a look at the control cabinet here in a minute.
Yeah.
Besides the Ajax control board, what else did you have to buy? I'm sure there was a lot of the nickel and dime stuff, wire and connectors, terminal blocks.
Yeah, there's always a few extras that you buy. It's just like any other project you start, But I told you before, I'm a junkyard junkie, so I have boxes of relays and switches and all kinds of things. And if you'll notice on the panel here, I actually put the start and stop buttons on here. So it's just a latching relay. So when I push the start button, the machine starts up, the controller goes on, and the machine's basically ready to go. I can push the stop button and it'll drop that relay off and everything goes off and whatever. So I didn't even use the main disconnect on the power side. So everything comes with these two buttons right here. And then I wired in the E-stop with a relay inside so that everything drops out. If I hit the E-stop, the machine stops instantly and everything's cool.
Okay, let's go over your control cabinet down.
Okay, so this is where I get really excited because if you'd have seen this machine when I brought it in, it had this huge control cabinet over here built in the 1980s. This thing was like a 1/4-inch thick material and it weighed hundreds of pounds with a old CRT monitor in it and all that good stuff. And so all that stuff went away. 2 full cabinets of stuff. The servo amplifiers on the other side, transformers in here. I mean, it was a nightmare, and it scared me, to be honest with you, when I looked at it with that little bit of electrical experience. So what I did is I bought the all-in-one. I got it and I go like, what? This is going to run my machine? And so now all of a sudden I got things here that is like half the size of a bread box that had all that equipment in it on a PCB, which was absolutely exciting as hell for me. And so I used the existing cables. These are the cables off of the motor. I wired the connectors on there. They just plug into the board. I put a power supply in. This was a toroidal power supply that I ordered online. Wasn't that expensive. This is the relay that I used and that I showed you earlier. That's controlled by the 2 buttons in front. So this turns the machine on and off, turns the power on to everything. And then I was able to take 12 volts off of this as well. That runs a couple of relays that I have. I put some circuit breakers in. I made sure everything was labeled so it's nice and neat. That's imperative as far as I'm concerned because if you do a good job wiring it, it's clean. Now, I don't have any trouble troubleshooting this thing. Scott was asking me to do some things the other day.
That's your VFD for your spindle right there, right?
Yeah, this is the VFD for the spindle. This is 2 horsepower, so it runs that VFD up on top there, and it controls the speed on the G-code program. Runs really well. Turned on by 2 solid-state relays. So there's some things that I did here that are a little bit overkill, but I'm pretty proud of my wiring, and it works really well. I've not had 1 iota of trouble with my wiring. Also, this control turns on your lube pump, and it also turns on my coolant as well, my mist coolant. So there's a number of relays in here that you can use for things like clamps. You can use it for probably your tool changer, that kind of thing. So
yeah, so those outputs, I think, are programmable. The inputs and outputs. If you need them for something else, you can use them for something else. But it came preset for like an email. I mean, if you follow the panel, it's basically going over.
Yeah, and lots of
spindle on off.
Right.
And your limit switches are.
Yeah. And lots of diagrams online that are available. And so there's also a place for your probe that you can put in. Like I said, I picked up an MPEG the other day, and it plugs in right here. The wiring diagram is right there. This is the encoders. These are the 3 motors I have, and then you can add your 4th axis on here as well.
Yeah, so you've got. So if somebody wanted to, they could always add the jog panel, Centroid's jog panel.
Exactly.
And if they want to add an MPG like you're going to do, you can add it here.
Yep.
And then if they need more I/O, that's what this PLC ports are.
Exactly.
It's for more. I mean, this thing can control quite a bit.
Yep.
and then there's the probe if you want to
Yeah.
do probing. And like you mentioned earlier, it has 3-axis, 3
Yep.
servo motors, and
Yeah.
you can add more to it.
Exactly.
If you want a
Now,
4th axis or 5th axis.
Before we get out of this panel, I want to mention that probably the most important thing for me and the most exciting thing about the controllers is that they're run with an Ethernet cable.
Right, no USB,
and
no printer
USBs,
ports.
no communication issues. It's just a beautiful thing. And you can run this thing from a computer as far as you can run that Ethernet cable as long as it's shielded, because you can run these a long ways away. You can see this one's coiled up here.
Yeah.
It's really short, runs back. Might want to take a quick shot.
Oh yeah, the Nook.
My Nook up on top. So basically, this little box right here runs this whole machine. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So I got my power supplies for my monitor, etc. But it's so simple. So I took out that big box of an XP computer and I put it up here, and everything's run off of this. I love this thing.
So it's really super compact. It's amazing.
So one of the first things I did when I built this, or when I started to run this, was I built these pieces for this arm that I built, this computer arm.
Mm-hmm.
So these are all CNC cut with my with this machine.
Oh, cool.
As well as the adjustment.
The bracket.
The bracket. So.
Okay, Dan, one of the things that caught my attention is you've got an external keyboard here. And it looks, the tabs on it look very familiar to the Centroid jog panel. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, actually, Keith over at Centroid posted this on the forum, and I thought, man, what a great idea, because the way you normally bring up the keypad is you push Alt-J on your computer, and that brings up the keypad in the screen. So then you can do some controls with the keypad, and so that's a little bit inconvenient. Works good, but it's like I said, a little bit inconvenient. So what Keith came up with is there's a keypad available from
X keys.
It's PI Engineering, actually. It's called an XK24, and it's a programmable keypad. And basically what you can do is you can replicate the buttons on the screen on the keypad, which makes it really, really handy. So that's what I did. So it comes blank like this, and then what you can do is Keith has come up with a file to print the buttons. And what I did is I actually took all those buttons and I put them in Microsoft Office, and I placed them on a nice piece of glossy photo paper, and I printed them on there, and then just cut them out, and you can see where you can just pop the tops off and put the buttons in your keyboard. And once you let's just turn this off again, Alt-J, and then once this thing is programmed, which is relatively easy, Keith has also got a file in there that programs all the correct codes into the keypad.
So it's a macro file.
It's a macro
That's basically
file.
a keyboard emulator, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the way you can control. You don't need Centroid's jog panel. You don't need all that stuff, because all the functions are controlled from keystrokes on a keyboard.
Exactly.
So that's what that is basically a keyboard emulator.
What it is Centroid has a beautiful keypad and a control center that they sell. It's relatively expensive for the do-it-yourselfer, and so this is a way that you can do it yourself and still control it with a keypad and not have to spend all that money.
And you get the functionality, a lot of the functionality of that jog panel.
So if you don't have a 4th axis, you got 2 extra buttons, and there's 2 auxiliary buttons that you can use for whatever you like turning your lube on or something like that. So you can program this the way you want it as well.
What did that cost, Dan? What did you see it ranging price-wise? I think I've seen them anywhere from like $120, $140-ish. Amazon sells them, I know that.
Yeah, you can get them on Amazon, and I bought mine directly from the company.
Oh, did you?
So I can't, to be honest with you, I can't remember what it was. I think it was around $80. But,
yeah.
Yeah, and good service. In fact, I talked to those folks out there, and they're very, very cooperative. It was easy to get a hold of it.
So to bring up, say you want to jog the machine, what do you need to do?
Yeah, so all you gotta do is there's a program, a keypad enable here, so if you push that button, your keypad comes up, but it also enables this pad. So for instance, if I want to jog this right now, all I gotta do is push that button and my machine jogs away there. Really handy. And it's got feed rate button, it's got the feed rate button. You can start a program, you can stop it. You can jog either in tenths or thousandths or whatever, and here's your stop button, incremental, continuous, works really, really well. So it's a lot of functionality in a small package. What I would recommend though, Marty, is that if you're going to do this, they have a membrane that you can put on top that I haven't installed yet, but it'd be easy to get chips and stuff in there, so make sure you get the membrane when you buy that. It's available on Amazon as well.
Oh, very cool. You know, speaking of, so you made the brackets here. I know that there's some other things that you made, Dan, with it, and I know you're into the quadcopters, as you can see them hanging up here.
Yep.
Why don't you show us some of the things that you've made with it?
One of the things I've done is, my brother's a woodworker, and I don't know if you're familiar with a scroll chuck. But what this thing is it's two pieces of, usually made out of wood, and it's got scrolls in it, and it's for holding wood bowls. And I made him one out of aluminum, so I have a video as well which you can tie into. But I was able to design it and cut the pieces in that machine, and it just turned out absolutely beautiful. Two identical pieces, and they scroll real nice.
Yeah,
you could never get it
You
done.
have that on your YouTube channel, right?
I do,
so
right.
we'll put a link in the description.
Yeah.
Well, this is going to be on your YouTube channel, so you can post it.
Yeah,
But
because the two things that I'm proud of, I did for my brothers. One was that chuck, and then my other brother's into cameras and photography, and I did a little bracket for him for adjusting the angle of his camera, and it turned out really, really well. It's expensive to buy, and it was a lot of work. I had to design the whole thing and did it all in CAD, and then I cut it in on the machine, but it turned out really nice. He's really proud of that piece. And the other thing I did, one of the first things I did actually was I designed a quadcopter frame, and so each one of these pieces was designed in the CAD program.
bring it out this way, Dan.
So that's the basically that's the frame, parts of the frame, and it all interlocks together.
Wow.
With these little brackets. So these kind of lock into here, like so. And so I designed all that on the CAD program. These are the legs. These are the arms that hold the motors. So these are short, and I've since changed the way I do things, but originally these parts were all cut on that machine as well. These are the, well, you can see the motor mounts. There's two pieces. Motors mount in here, and then it all kind of fits together with three layers where you put your motors and your controllers and everything else.
Really neat.
So this was a big project. I worked, put a lot of hours designing it. And cutting it, and of course it actually worked very well when I was done with it. So, you know, these are the kind of things you can do. If you challenge yourself, there's nothing you can't do with that machine.